I'm Keira Wickliffe Berger, and as you can see, my background is I'm a nurse with a master's in public health. So I'm going to give a little bit of a different twist to the Master Naturalist minute, but it should be plenty applicable for everyone. So one of my big interests is the One Health approach in public health. And so I guess I should put a disclaimer, even though I'm not mentioning who my employer is, but they have nothing to do with any of this or anything I say, just in case anyone snoops and figures it out. But so I'm going to talk about One Health approach. Oh, come on. Are we okay? There we go. So a little bit of what I'll touch on, and I'm going to apologize now. I'm a little off today. We just put our dog down at the end of last week. So he was 13 and a half years old. So I'm still kind of a little mentally off. So you may have to bear with me. So I'll go over what One Health is. We're going to use Lyme disease as an example of one of the One Health issues and kind of approach, because that's one, especially being in New York, that's a little bit of a hot topic. Nature and mental health is a One Health issue. And environmental justice and the fact that you guys are all public health advocates as Master Naturalists, whether you want to be or not. Okay, so what is One Health? There's a couple different definitions out there, but in general, it's the idea that the health of people is connected to the health of animals in our shared environment. So when we protect one thing, we help protect all. You'll notice it is most of the definitions out there are a little bit human-centric, for better or for worse, and we'll kind of touch base on that. But we know like the health of humans is deeply interlinked with the health of animals and the health of ecosystems. So now you can start seeing why this is appropriate for a Master Naturalist talk. It's because without the health of a healthy ecosystem, without the animals within the healthy ecosystem, we can't have healthy people. And healthy people actually, and what people do, obviously affects the health of animals and the health of the ecosystem. So any change in these relationships impacts all the other relationships. One Health has mostly been heard about when looking at zoonotic diseases, so diseases that spread from animals to humans, and vice versa. So that's kind of the big thing, is looking at these interconnections. It is a little bit more focused on the human side of things, but that doesn't mean that it's not something that we have to take into consideration as a Master Naturalist. This is a different viewpoint that I kind of liked looking at this view of One Health a little bit more. It kind of broke down the human health issues like populations, social determinants, diet, food security, and the antibiotics and antimicrobials is where it starts crossing over into more animal health. Unfortunately, because One Health tends to be, again, more human-centric, animal health often refers to primarily livestock and companion pets. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be with wild animals, ecosystems, and so forth. But even as you can look at this one, you can see it's still primarily human health focused. This one's a little bit better. It breaks it down: environment, animals, people, and plants. So it breaks ecosystems down a little bit more into plants versus environment, which is kind of nice, just because a lot of the plant diseases do greatly impact the ecosystem, the animals, and then again, food security for both people and animals later. Like unfortunately, coffee is going to eventually become really expensive because of coffee wilt. That's what I know it'll impact me because without coffee, I'm a bear to deal with in the morning. So these are the different things that won't affect necessarily animals, but it does affect them because of our farming of coffee takes away their ecosystems and where they live. So everything, unfortunately, everything we do impacts everything else. So we've kind of touched on it. Currently, One Health is very human-centric. It's very infectious disease oriented. The two big things it focuses on is infectious disease, so zoonotics like COVID, that we just unfortunately saw how easy spillovers can happen, and then because of our globalization go everywhere. Even the spotted lanternfly, yeah. That is a One Health issue. It came over because of human globalization bringing things, and now it's going to interrupt food and different ecosystems. So even though we are only primarily focused because of the crop damage and eventually focused on the ecosystem damage, the only reason they originally were kind of concerned was because of the crop issues. And unfortunately, with a lot of the invasive stuff, it's human impact first, and then, oh, wait, now we look at the ecosystem impact later on. As of right now, animal health is still kind of focused on companion animals and livestock. Hopefully that will continue to shift and change. One Health approaches are still fairly new, even though we've kind of known this for a really long time that we're all interconnected. The science is only just now catching up. So hopefully that will start pulling in as One Health gets more notice, gets more funding. Hopefully they'll start pulling in the wild animal health, especially now with COVID. And we're looking at deer as a potential host of COVID, where we know we can share COVID to wild deer. Can they share it back? And if they can share it back, that's a huge issue. Deer with wasting disease and their potential to spread. I can't think of the mad cow disease professional name. The CJD variant. So deer mad cow disease. I'm sorry, my brain is not there today. That's a One Health issue that you can spread disease back to humans if they don't take the appropriate connections. We've had cases of forest rangers finding a dead puma, dead cougar out west. They saw blood coming out of the nose, so they originally thought that the cougar was dead from trauma, brought it back to their house, did a necropsy without gloves, without respiratory protection, the person who did all this ended up found dead on their floor because they ended up with a really bad case of, I believe it was pulmonary, not brucellosis, but pulmonary plague, essentially. And they died, they lived alone and didn't seek help in time, thought they just had the flu and ended up found dead when they didn't show up for work. But they thought they were just doing a normal autopsy on a cougar that was down from trauma, even though the only sign of potential trauma was just a little bit of blood from the nose and nowhere else. So there's a lot of run-ins with it, especially with Master Naturalists. While you're out in the woods or wherever you are, you're interacting with these ecosystems, you're interacting with potential wildlife, with potential vectors and different aspects, and you're educating as well. So a lot of these topics, why they don't always seem like it's directly connected with being a master naturalist, is actually very pertinent. The antibiotic resistance, maybe not so much. It's good for you to know. Don't use your antibiotics unless you really have to. Don't make sure if you are on antibiotics, take them all. Same with any of your pets. Most of our antibiotic resistance is actually coming from the massive farms. So, but we have an impact as well. Same with this, we're just dumping our antibiotics in the trash and not getting rid of it appropriately. Can also end up in the water system and the soil, and therefore animals and so forth. Vector-borne disease is a big one. Think your mosquitoes, your ticks, fleas, not as much, but fleas are an issue and are a vector. Think plague. We know that the cute little groundhogs like to share it every so often. Every year, there's people who are getting plague from the prairie dogs. But the big ones, especially up here, are the ticks and the mosquitoes. And as the climate changes and we get hotter, we've seen that ticks and mosquitoes are spreading, and they don't die off during the winter nearly as much as they used to because they're not getting that cold that they need. Diseases in plants directly impact everyone with food security. You start getting different plant diseases and they get resistant diseases, your food supplies for both animals, wildlife, and then the decrease in ecosystem. Mental health is one that most do not ever think about. Master naturalists probably think about it a little bit more because even though in this picture it shows the human-animal bond, we have science, and I'll touch on that later, showing the importance of people being out in nature. So again, it's this common theme of protecting one protects it all, though we need to do a little bit of better job of making people realize protecting wildlife and nature and our ecosystems will actually protect us instead of thinking protect humans and then protect everyone else. The shift is coming. It's just really, really slow, unfortunately. So I'll go over Lyme disease real quick. So again, vector-borne disease, they're on the rise. Lyme is going to be one of the least of our problems eventually, even in New York. With the warmer temperatures we're getting, ticks are expanding there, ticks and mosquitoes are expanding there, where they live. Sorry, they're expanding where they used to find them. They're carrying more diseases. We will unfortunately probably see, you've heard cases of malaria in Florida. I want to say California, but I don't think that's right. But a couple different states have already said that there was local transmission of malaria. Malaria had been in the US all the way up to DC, at least up to DC. It's going to come back to the US, unfortunately, with globalization, people traveling, bringing malaria back, being on the wrong malaria medication, if they're even on malaria medication in certain areas, malaria resistance. We are set up. We do have the mosquitoes that can carry malaria up in New York. So it's only a matter of time as climate change, mosquito range keeps going north. People keep traveling. It's just a matter of time before malaria eventually settles in. That also means there's an increase of risk of dengue, chikungunya, Zika, etc. Plus all the new ticks that we are importing in and those new diseases. So Lyme disease, unfortunately, is home here, as everyone's well aware. I was lucky enough to live in a couple places where it had not been, and keyword had not. I was in Michigan when they first started capturing ticks and discovered it was traveling westward. And then I was in Kentucky when they started getting their first locally transmitted Lyme disease. Unfortunately, what most people think is the transmitter is deer. It's not. It's that cute little white-footed mouse. That's the host for the bacteria. For real. Goodness gracious, my mind, I have it. Sorry, I have some of my notes up on a different screen. Borrelia burgdorferi is the bacteria that causes Lyme. So to understand, like my background's infectious disease epidemiology. So to understand how people are getting sick with diseases, you have to understand the vector and the host and their behavior in order to understand like prevention of disease. So for a long time, everyone, and still a lot of people have this misconception that it's the deer causing the Lyme. It's not, it's this little mouse. And the reason why we know this, besides testing mice, is that the life cycle of ticks, once they lay eggs, they only have a blood meal for each life stage. So come out of the egg, they're in their larva stage. They're too small to have a big animal for their first food source. So they're typically low to the ground, and they're in places that mice are common. So mice are often the very first blood meal a black-legged tick gets in their larva stage. With the mouse being the carrier for this bacteria, that's when the tick gets infected. Once the tick is infected, it's infected for the rest of its life. So then they move on to their nymph stage. They're already infected. This is where most people pick up the tick because now they're starting to move up. They're bigger. They're starting to move up in the a little bit higher in places where people are a little bit more going into. They get on humans. Because they're so small, most people don't ever see their tick bite because of the nymph stage. They just see what looks to be a new freckle and move on. Because even when they're engorged, they're really not that big. They still look like a freckle, or they're in your hair and you can't feel them because they're so small, or see them, and then they go off and do their thing. Their adult stage is when you start seeing it on deer. They only really get on deer once they get on once they make it to their adult stage, if they make it. And this all depends on, since they only take a blood meal as they're right before they transition to their next stage, they have to live through all this in order to keep transmitting. And you can kind of see here, they go egg to larva, the little red arrow shows that they picked up the pathogen from the mouse, go to nymph, and they can either bite person, back to the mouse, because even in the nymph stage, they still tend to stay on small rodents and then move to the adult. And that's when you start seeing them picked up and transported by deer, and deer leave and move it to where they lay their eggs. So how the ecosystem, again, a lot of you probably already know, but people want to blame the deer. They forget there's mice. The biggest issue is the Japanese barberry that suburbia loves to plant, that now gets out into the woods because it's extremely invasive. And these are what we call tick nurseries. Mice love to hide in them, and same with chipmunks, because it's protective. Nothing can get them in a Japanese barberry. They're safe. It creates that microclimate that ticks really love to lay eggs in, because it's more humid. So you get this constant cycle that just increases. And deer don't really eat barberry. So now you've got lots of barberry because there's more deer in suburbia or anywhere. Even the sterile barberry eventually become unsterile, move out into the woods. Deer can't, it's one of the few things the deer still don't touch. It keeps multiplying, everything keeps multiplying. Ticks don't die off, or they are out pretty much all year round now because black-legged ticks can survive until they can be hanging out till about like 35 degrees, give or take. So we've everyone thinks that, a lot of people think suburbia should be safe from ticks, but we've actually, in urban areas, but we've actually increased ticks in those areas because of a lack of biodiversity and just how we create our man-made habitats. So you get this high diversity, you don't have as many reservoirs because they have predators. So they're getting eaten, so less mice for ticks to get on that carry the bacteria, fewer infections. So in reality, this loss of biodiversity, this increase in sterilization is actually causing more disease. So that's kind of where is a good way to start showing how everything really plays a role in spread of infectious diseases. And you can see there's no pathways for wildlife to go through and increase biodiversity. There's no real good habitat for biodiversity once you have this land fragmentation. So unfortunately, we try to make our areas sterile and it just increases our tick disease. So interestingly, this is an old article. There's been a couple others that kind of support it that show spraying for ticks does not decrease tick-borne diseases. They'll still pick up just as many. It actually may increase the risk of tick-borne diseases because you're not, while you stop the original ticks being in your yard, it doesn't prevent mice or chipmunks or whatever bringing the ticks back in, and it won't kill them. And you're just increasing the ticks coming in. And then you get into the issues of long-term health issues for animals, humans, and then the damage that it's doing to the ecosystem. So nature and mental health. This falls under One Health. So we know our environment interactions with animals, and this really should add, and natural environment can affect our mental health. We've seen this with, especially in the last couple of years, where there's a push for this prescribed outdoor activity. So we know that when you go outside, that stress decreases, you get time in green space will reduce your cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, which increases heart issues, increases actually obesity. So nature, being just out in nature, increases endorphins, increases dopamine, which promotes happiness. It helps boost your immune system, lowers blood pressure, reduces stress, improves mood, increases ability to focus, even in kids with ADHD, can help increase speed of recovering from surgery and illness, increase your energy level, improve sleep, maybe not always improve sleep if you have really bad allergies, but you kind of get the thing. So you can see like the National Park Service is trying to prescribe going out to parks. You've got Nature's Your Medicine. all different, like every American should spend nature time out in your neighborhood park for physical and mental health. It's Canada has their own things saying, look, it decreases fatigue, anxiety, tension, stress, pain reduction, and heart health. And we have studies that show that this really is beneficial. We know we're happier, our stress hormones drop, it increases creativity, all these benefits for, at least for humans. So if humans find benefit, we're more likely to protect something and keep it going. So this is how us showing science, showing that we have benefits, hopefully increases the benefit of increasing green space, protecting the green spaces we have, creating or decreasing this land fragmentation, increasing biodiversity, etc. Just more example of why prescribing nature works. And this is from England, yes, but a lot of countries right now are doing this. So there's a lot of different organizations. Like I've personally worked with Hike It Baby, which is now outgrown, who's trying to really get children outside from birth on and enjoying the environment, enjoying nature so that they protect it. Children in Nature Network does a lot of the same, but for older kids. We know it helps kids. The biggest issue is the equitable access. There's not equitable access to outdoor spaces. So this is great, as you saw in some of the pictures, for those who are probably white, middle to upper class, and already live in an area where there's parks within walking distance. That's not the majority, unfortunately. So this is just a quote from Richard Lowe. So this is where the environmental justice and you as public health advocates come in. This is a different twist on the One Health. Instead of just the basic middle, where this is a triangle and you kind of ignore the middle part, they added environmental justice into it. So we know you keep wildlife healthy, you decrease zoonosis, you decrease zoonotic diseases, and therefore decrease the risk of it transmitting to people. There's that resource use. So environmental health, you have both wildlife health, so the overhunting or overfishing, or need to increase hunting, because with deer population, often you have to increase the hunting, but very prescriptive type hunting and so forth. Those resources are affected by your environmental health resource, your ecosystem resources. Your ecosystem services or disservices directly impact human health, and human resource use directly impacts environmental health. But this isn't all equal use. So the fight for climate justice doesn't just extend, sorry, I need to move. Can't see what it says. If you can read it alone, but it impacts negatively on our kids and other young people's mental health and environment. So without focusing on climate justice, everyone gets hurt. Yes, I know, computer. And environmental health by CDC, it's damage to the environment that affects human and animal health. So the wildfires is one. We may think deforestation is one of the really big ones that comes to mind, which increases biodiversity. But it's also, there's this level of environmental racism. So when you start moving into the public health realm, And this is where public health and Master Naturalists start over even more, is that race is the single most significant predictor of a person living near contaminated air, water, or soil. And just saying contaminated air, water, or soil automatically puts us in the realm of air pollution, no green space, no safe water. So things that we as Master Naturalists have to care for. And again, they often live in near factories, so the air is really bad. There's higher nitrogen dioxide exposure. They're less likely to have safe water. This isn't just urban, this is also rural. So these issues are kind of across the board. And rural areas have just as much of an issue with some of these pollution stuff and lack of biodiversity and infectious disease crossover than urban areas as well. So one way to help this and help create environmental justice, and there's this rule that some of the organizations that really work with family and kids and increasing green space, is that really everyone should have access to a healthy green space within 10 minutes of walking. Doesn't matter if you're rural, doesn't matter if you're urban, though this typically falls a little bit more towards urban, because they assume like, oh, your farm's green space, but it's sterile green space. It's monotone. It's not giving you some of the biodiversity that you kind of need to get some of those benefits from nature. So this kind of gives a picture of trying to add in your pollinator gardens, your trees, getting the healthy water, increasing walkways, safe walkways, and decreasing the amount of cars being used. You know, all these things that we need to do to combat climate change, but that also directly impacts human health. And unfortunately, with policy, if you can change it to like human health impacts, some of the policy stuff gets pushed through a little bit easier. It shouldn't, but it does. So when you can start showing impacts of changing things to human health, because unfortunately our policies are human-centric, you can still move the climate change needle and environmental protection needle a little bit more by giving it that human side. One good example of this is I'm in New Rochelle, down outside of lower Hudson Valley into New York City. So we have, in my section of New Rochelle, I can walk down the street and into a wooded area that's a park. I can drive 3 minutes down the road and be in another park. We have a playground in our neighborhood. But if I go further into New Rochelle, they have no green, into like the more city part, they have no green spaces. They have no real parks that they can walk to. They're starting to build this stuff. There's a lot of car congestion. It's a concrete jungle. The air is worse, and the population is poorer and has a lot more health issues. We are conservation that I've been working with a little bit that I can walk to. They will now, it's the only wooded park that the city owns, and they take kids over the summer from the inner city or the more city part of New Rochelle, and they transport them to our small wooded park. And this is the first time they've seen woods. And this isn't a huge park, but these kids, if it wasn't for this free camp, would never have seen what woods look like, would never see. We have a community garden. We're starting a pollinator garden. It's an old horse farm that's grown over. They're creating a biodiversity zone. So they're starting to see, oh, this is what wild birds look like. This is what butterflies look like. Just, oh, this is more than just a city squirrel. And you can see their faces light up. This happens. We saw the same thing in Lexington, Kentucky. City, but also very rural because it's all farms. Most of these kids had never been in the woods because you had to drive there. So once you get some of the transportation issues taken care of, if you cannot build into their living space, you get some of this. And people don't change or want to protect something that doesn't directly impact them often, or that they've never experienced. So when we bring nature into these areas, you're decreasing air pollution, you're increasing mental health, and you're hopefully, by using the right plants and creating corridors, you're increasing biodiversity and hopefully helping decrease some of the issues with climate change, among other things. The one other issue, and I didn't put a slide up for this, that I've seen in some of my new line of work is that often, so I kind of work in the disaster role area now, and a lot of our environment and mitigation aspects do not take into consideration some of these very issues. So we know flooding is going to be an increased issue from now on, just with the climate change. Places aren't increasing necessarily their native population of trees, bushes, shrubs, even in the areas of trying to decrease all these yards and increase planting stuff that has the deeper root systems to create catch basins for the water so it doesn't quite go into the system. There's lots of different things that even as master naturalists, we can be like, hey, maybe if you thought about creating, like returning this back into its native swamp type situation it may have been. There are ways where we can help increase the plant biodiversity that increases the insect biodiversity that'll decrease the mosquito population naturally, and other ways to decrease mosquito population that'll impact human health, because most mosquitoes can only fly like 100 yards. So as long as you can keep people from living within those 100 yards, then often you don't have an issue with disease transmission unless a lot of people are hiking through. But just having someone's backyard not be an issue, because that's often when you start getting people then spraying, and then it runs down into the swamp, and then you start killing things off and get the algae blooms. So there's a lot of things we can do that will directly impact our environment and then increase our health, our environmental health, and just create this happy circle versus the negative circle that we kind of have right now. I think that's about, I talked really fast, I'm sorry. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Keira. That was very nice. And thank you for your perspective. It's timely because I've had the Master Naturalist volunteer weekends, one focused on a different topic or in a different region of the state once a year for quite some time. And I just got a new grant for the next 3 years. And one of the topics for one of the summer weekends, volunteer weekends, is going to focus on One Health. It's something that's big at Cornell in the vet school, and they've actually recently expanded and created a new department of public health and ecosystems. So,
Oh, awesome.
so it's really something that's grown here at Cornell. And so it was perfect timing that you offered to do this, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
I know I went through a lot, and One Health is huge, as you can imagine. So I was trying to like just hit on different, give a taste of all the different things.
So one thing that I'll mention, something that's fascinating to me is COVID and white-tailed deer. What's fascinating is how quickly deer were detected with COVID once it started. And that was, winter or very early spring. And also then how widespread it's become. And, I think about like white nose syndrome in bats, and that's something that can be spread to bat. They're in tight colonies. And so I can see, and they go to different places from their hibernaculums and go out to different roosts with other bats in the summer. So I can see how a disease like that could spread so rapidly. But I'm still baffled. I mean, even though people come into contact with deer and people farm deer, and so maybe came into contact with them, the rate of spread and how pervasive it is just baffling to me. Do you know of anything?
There's a couple of theories. There's some theories, with that some of the first COVID cases may have gotten out into the deer through wildlife rehabbers that came in contact and may or may not have been wearing the right PPE. So they may have just been wearing surgical masks to protect themselves from the deer or others, when really the correct PPE is the N95, the really fit tested. A surgical mask will stop droplets, but won't stop airborne transmission. So they could have spread it to the deer. We know, like, once deer are together, they're very close, they're breathing on each other. Potential of like, hey, one sneezed in this patch of grass, as long as it stayed a little wet and another one came right behind it, they may not have had direct contact, but they may have inhaled some of the droplets left there. Just because of how their nose, mouth, and eating. So there's that theory. The farming of people working with deer, the deer farms and the wild deer contacting. There's questionable did they come in contact with a house cat that got out or someone else? Because they're so involved in human, even the wild ones now are so come in and out of human contact so often these days. So it's really hard to tell how it actually got in, but it spread like wildfire, and we just hope it's not transmittable back. But still time will tell, and that just begs like what other animal vectors may be out there that we can accidentally transmit to, and then eventually they'll be able to transmit back. And we know bats are one of the unfortunate vectors that often, because of their biology, can carry a lot of diseases and not be impacted and then transmit it to others.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer asks, are there any online resources to learn more about this topic?
Yes, there are lots. Depends, using the wrong computer, sorry. It depends on which kind of route you want. CDC has a lot. They have their own division right now of One Health. It is more emerging infectious disease focused. So CDC's one. The two big ways right now looking at it are through human health and then the animal health, because One Health has come out of the vet side. So a lot of the vet schools will have a lot of information on it. Let's see what else. I should have put up a bunch of resources, but those are the two big ones. WHO also has a lot on One Health. And just once you pull up Google, it's been pretty good about giving you legit places to get real information. Pretty high top rating.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see, somebody else had. Travis says, seems to take a balance of individual behavior change as well as municipal policy and regulation change. How can we as community members start to address or better inform our municipal leaders?
It's writing them, constantly writing them, provide examples. I found personally that we can give, I mean, as an epi, I love data. I will throw data out at everyone, but that doesn't get the story across. Data only gives a small piece. It gives you the science behind it, but really most of the policy and regulators don't always understand science. They need to understand why, and the why is the big one. Giving them a story of why they need to change it, story of how like such and such policy, if this policy went through, this is an impact that would directly see. They need to see that it will be a benefit, and often that's through story versus science, unfortunately.
And so much of it also seems to be financially driven as well.
Yes, yes, it does, which is, yes. I wish I had better answer for the finance part.
Okay, Suzanne asks, how widespread is COVID in the deer population in the US, and what are reliable resources for COVID and deer in the US?
That's an excellent question. I don't think we have a really good one. We know it's a pretty decent amount, but I don't think we have a true reliable resource because we don't have a system right now that is set up for good surveillance in wild animal populations. We have it for certain diseases for agricultural animals and companion animals, those that vets regularly come in contact with, that they have certain conditions they have to report. But we don't have that with wildlife. I would love to see that because we know animal diseases cross over from animals all the time, even something simple like E. coli or Campylobacter that humans can get, they can give it to their dog, then their dog can give it back to you. Like it can go back and forth, but we don't. Campylobacter, E. coli, Salmonella are all reportable in the human health world, but they're not for on the vet side. So we can get a good picture of human stuff, but often the animal side of infectious diseases, even if they're transmittable back and forth, we don't have a surveillance system in place that really captures that data. So we don't have, I wish we had the answers, but we don't. And again, like Travis says, it's a funding thing. They don't want to fund people to go out and get this data.
Thank you. I know that the original study, I think, right in the beginning of COVID was conducted on deer in Michigan, New York, and Pennsylvania, I think, were the states. And that was the first one. And it was surprising to me that was really early and how prevalent it was. And that there is a research article and a journal article, and I don't recall which journal it's in. And then since then, I think I've seen another journal article or two. So in the primary literature, you know, it's pretty science heavy, but you can find some articles. But that might be something that we could do as a group of Master Naturalists when we're focusing on One Health as, you know, a volunteer effort to learn more about it. And if somebody is interested in researching it and, you know, creating, you know, looking at the primary literature and research and creating some new fact sheets that we could actually put on the website, and that could be a volunteer activity, because I think it's a really important topic to develop a little bit more. And if we had better resources that we could use to get the word out, It would be really helpful.
Agreed.
Terry asks, a barberry was planted along my front walk before I bought the house and I haven't yet replaced it. I had no idea that it is a resource for ticks and will replace it with natives as soon as I can. Fortunately, I haven't seen it spread into the wider sections of my yard. Any other recommendations for how to address this?
You most likely won't see it spread in your yard because it's birds who eat the berries and then they travel far and then poop out the seeds. And then you see, that's the problem with most invasives that we plant in our yards. The common thing is, oh, well, it's not spreading in my yard, so it can't be that invasive. Well, most of the time it's because birds or other wildlife eat the berries or whatever seeds and then travel away and then spread it. So you never directly see the spread because it's often too far away for you to, unless you're constantly going out and looking for it, for most people to see. It's actually fairly easy, minus the nasty barbs, to get out. The root system isn't that deep. If you have either pay someone to do it or a root, it's not root buster, but it's a shovel, special serrated shovel that you can use that goes through roots. That's what we use to get rid of ours because we had them all through our front yard. And then replant it with different natives, the best way to go. But those barbs you have to be really careful because they are nasty and they will get you. Hopefully that answers that.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
I just want to mention that I am so grateful for you doing this presentation. I work with Cornell University with the Integrated Pest Management Program. And this is something that's been on my radar screen, and I know that I need to dive into it more. And I just haven't taken that time because I've got other stuff going on. So thank you for encouraging me that it's time to do more of a deep dive into it. In fact, I had taken a eSTEM course out of Cornell, Marianne Krasny's group. And for my project, I had done a lesson plan called Biodiversity, Nature's Health Insurance. So I was thinking about One Health before it was even, I had ever heard of it before.
And there's a catch. It's hard because as we increase biodiversity, our human population isn't decreasing per se. Once you start increasing that interaction, it actually increases. It's this fine balance of increasing biodiversity, but not increasing human interaction with it, because the more humans interact, the more chance you get for spillover, like we saw in China. But often that means you're going through and you're taking down forests and moving further and further in. And speaking of that, so there's this balance. And interestingly, once you look at like the people who are in the Amazon and taking the forest down, and this is one of the other why public health should matter to Master Naturalists, is most of the people cutting down the forests in like the Amazon and even other countries, they don't actually, often they're indigenous populations. They don't want to cut down these forests. They don't want to deforest their land, but it's the only job that they can get that'll give them health insurance or pay them well enough that they can get health care. So if they could have something that could provide them with good pay and provide them with health care, they would protect their land and not deforest it, not cut it down. So it's this balance that has to be hit, which we often forget. We just assume, everyone just assumes, oh, they're just taking it down to take down. And it's not, they don't want to, it's their only option most of the time, the people who are actually doing the job, not the like multi-million CEOs who are hiring people to do it. Just to throw another thing in there. You're on mute, Christy.
Yeah, sorry. I said, it is kind of ironic that to do work that will provide you with healthcare and yet require more healthcare for you inevitably. Yes.